but that's just the numbers that we're looking at right now. So I just wanted to mention that only because COVID is on everyone's mind, and with you guys, again, as I say, you deal with it all the time. So just a few statistics. Most people, believe it or not, do not die in a suicide attempt. Um, with youths, they actually will attempt suicide 1 to 200 times prior to there being a completion. Now, obviously, that's a total number. But one of the reasons for that is with youths, they haven't developed to a point where this is what I'm going to do and I'm going to do it now. It's this is what I'm going to do. And 30 seconds later, a friend calls and says, let's go skateboarding. So, okay, I won't do it now. So you get that right foot, left foot kind of thing. But when we jump into the elderly, and this is what you have to really, really be aware of, that number drops from a remarkable 100 to 200 attempts per one completion down to 4. So that's 4 attempts per completion with an elderly person. And again, it's a person who's been around a long time. They don't have a lot of right, left kinds of things, right foot, left foot. They make up their mind, they're going to do it, and they follow through on it. So when you're dealing with elderly people, you need to be aware of that. Reporting of the problem of suicide attempts, it's always been a difficult situation because there's a lot of underreporting. And one of the reasons for the underreporting is, let's say there were suicide attempts within a family. It almost comes under the heading of don't ask, don't tell. And the word never really gets out, and it's covered up and it's not addressed because of the unbelievable stigma attached to suicide still today. I will try for the most part to not use the term committed suicide, and I would like you to learn not to do that. But attempted to take their life by suicide, took their life by suicide. And the analogy I always like to give about that is related to the stigma situation. You wouldn't say he committed pancreatic cancer. He committed heart failure. And why? There's no stigma attached to someone dying from pancreatic cancer or dying from a heart condition. Well, suicide, quite frankly, the doors are kept closed a lot of dealing with it because people have attached the stigma to it. And by saying things like committed, intentional, did it to himself, etc., we're never going to remove that stigma, and we need to work hard on doing that. So QPR, as Marcia mentioned, stands for question, persuade, and refer. Now, one thing that's important to understand is QPR training is not intended to be a form of counseling or treatment. I'm not a social worker, psychiatrist, psychologist. That's not what this is about. This is about you and me and everyday people and how significant your role can be in helping to prevent a suicide. QPR, and there's a word I'm about to mention to you, you'll probably hear me say a number of times in this presentation. QPR is intended to offer hope through positive action. Now, some of the goals we hope to attain in our QPR training today is to make all of you what we refer to as gatekeepers. And if you think of a gatekeeper, that's sort of the person that keeps an eye on things, right? It's okay for you to come through. It's not okay for you to come through, but they're watching the big picture. So as gatekeepers, hopefully what we're going to be able to help you with today is how to recognize someone who's at a risk of suicide. To get you to be able to demonstrate your increased knowledge of intervention skills, we're going to teach you some of those skills. And you're going to be able to demonstrate those either if you're training someone, working with someone, having a discussion with someone. Describe the knowledge of referral resources. We want you to be able to know where to go when you get to a point where someone agrees to let you help them. You know, we can be the greatest diagnosticians in the world, but if we don't know, when we say to someone, you have this, And they say, oh, I do? Wow, what do I do? And you sit there and you throw your hands up and say, well, I don't know. I just wanted to let you know you have it. Okay. So you need to know when you get the information, what do you do with that information? I'm going to go through some common myths and facts, and I think you'll find some of them interesting. And if you're 100% honest with yourself, you're going to say, oh, yeah, I did think that. I sort of thought that, or I wasn't so sure about that. But some of the things we've all said and done are actually myths and not true. I'm going to get you to be able to identify at least 3 of the risk factors that you should be aware of, but also at the same time, understand and learn about 3 protective factors against suicide. Now, the biggie is demonstrate how to ask about suicidal intent. We're going to talk in depth about that. It's not as easy as some may think, and more difficult than others may think. It's a tough one, but it has to be. And know how to listen, which is hard for all of us sometimes, and then to have the ability to stick with it and persuade someone to get help. So let's go through some of the myths. Now, when I say one of these myths, I'm going to pause for 5 seconds or so. I just want you to think about it and think about, is this something you thought, or no, that's ridiculous. Why would I ever think that? That's okay too. So the first one would be no one can stop a suicide. It is inevitable. No one can stop a suicide. It is inevitable. What do you think about that when you hear that myth? Well, what I think about is how many times have you heard someone say, well, if they're going to do it, they're going to do it. That's the one that comes to my mind, which is saying it's inevitable. If someone really is going to take their life by suicide, they're just going to do it. There's nothing I can do. Well, the fact is that if people in crisis can get the help they need, and this is sort of a biggie, they will probably never be suicidal again. So think of the power one has to prevent this from ever happening again by interdicting the first time and not believing in the myth that no one can help, no one can stop it. A second myth would be confronting a person, and this is really huge. Confronting a person about suicide will only make them angry and increase the risk of suicide. Now, I was meeting with some friends of mine this morning, and they were asking about this program. And this is one of the ones I mentioned. And one of my friends said, well, but by confronting them or saying something to someone, and his words were, but won't that put them over the edge? So a lot of people do feel that way. But there's another piece of this that makes people a little skeptical about getting involved, which is, well, what if I'm wrong? What if they're not really thinking about suicide? Even though my guts are telling me I got a bad feeling about this, will I lose this friend? It's my best friend. I don't want to hurt their feelings. Will I push them away by saying this? Well, guess what? If your guts are really screaming at you that much, take the chance, okay? Because the fact of the matter is that when you ask someone directly about any suicidal intent, the opposite happens, factually. It actually lowers anxiety. And it opens up, which is so important, it opens up a line of communication. And if you've opened up a line of communication, what have you just done? Well, you've just lowered the risk of an impulsive act. You built some breathing room in there, a point of hesitation. So don't be afraid to ask. Another myth is that only experts can prevent suicide. Well, let's hope that's not true, because if it is, you and I are spending an awful lot of time here doing absolutely nothing. I can tell you firsthand it's not true. Many, many years ago, more than I care to remember, so I'm not going to tell you how long ago it was, I was in California. I was getting ready to deploy overseas. I was in the Navy. And I volunteered for something called Suicide Prevention of Alameda County. It was a crisis hotline, working the phones. And what I found out from that experience is that folks who were calling in, some of them already had therapists, some didn't, but they weren't looking to talk to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a social worker. They were looking for a regular, everyday human being like them that they could relate to share their story with. And then hopefully that person would listen. And by listening, we hope we can help prevent the tragedy of a suicide. We don't have to have credentials to do it. Just be there for them and let them know you're there for them. There's a myth that suicidal people keep their plans to themselves. For the most part, that's really not true. Now, that doesn't include, which we'll talk about a little later, someone who we refer to as a lethal planner. But for the most part, quite often, especially in younger people, they'll talk about it and usually talk about it more the closer the time comes when they plan on doing it, which is usually the week preceding the actual event or attempt. Again, what are we trying to do here today? Get you sensitive enough to pick up on the vibes or pick up on the indicators that something might be going on to get you to ask the question. Another myth that I, again, personal experience with, again, in California, those who talk about suicide don't do it. Well, this is not a movie, folks. This is not, well, you're going on the ledge. If you're going to jump, you're going to, I'm going to go have a cup of coffee. No. First off, if someone is even talking about this, there's a problem, right? If they're in that, even talking about, well, maybe I will, and there's something wrong, something's going on. My personal experience with this was on a suicide prevention agency. We had a gentleman who used to call every single night, 7 nights a week. And one night we had a newer person on who had all the best intentions in the world. And let's say that the caller's name was John. And one night said to John, we're really, really happy that you call us every night. We do. We want to talk to you. We like talking to you. And it's good that you know we're here for you. But if I could just share with you one thing, we only have 2 lines here. And sometimes there's someone that might be trying to get through who can't. Well, John takes that as, and the person who's calling through might really be considering suicide because we sort of know you're not, you just call every night. So John hung up. The next day, they found John. John took his life. How do we know it was John? John had a paper that he left behind, a note, and it was addressed to Suicide Prevention of Alameda County. And all that it said was, see, I told you I'd do it. So someone is talking about it, pay attention. Once a person decides to complete suicide, there's nothing anyone can do to stop them. And again, based on some of the things we've just talked about, we know that's not true. Because suicide, it's the most preventable kind of death there is. If you pick up on the vibes and you pick up on the feelings and you bring it up, and you get that moment of hesitation in there, you can do something. We can all do something. So how can you help? Well, helping really, again, has to do with asking that question. Some other myths is that, suicidal people will turn to a book or something before they will turn to a person. They may read about trying to understand what their tendencies are all about, but that's not where they're going to get the answers. They're going to get the answers from you and me. That's important to know. Now, there's some protective factors involved that we need to be aware of. And we break them down into different categories, but the first one is societal. And in a societal big picture, if you will, do we have physical and mental health care availability for folks who need that help? And I'm talking to you about this now because I would like you to sort of pay more attention, if you're not already, to what's happening in your own communities or in your own state. What kind of a job are we doing? Many years ago when I worked with severely emotionally disturbed children, we would bring a kid in, work with that kid for a year. You take a kid who was thrown out of school, beating people up, and a year later, he's wearing a suit and a tie and asking a social worker if she'd like apple pie with her tea or whatever. But then it's over. We finished our job, and where did the kid go? Right back to the same environment. I don't know how much it's changed out there. I don't think it's changed a lot, but take a look at what's available for folks who are trying to struggle in the community. And if there's any way you can make it better, do so. The other thing we need to talk about is restricting lethal means of suicide. Now, this is not a lecture on pro-gun, anti-gun, it has nothing to do with it. What it has to do with is if you have guns, that's the number one lethal weapon used in suicides, lock it up, trigger guards, put it in a box, ammunition in a separate location, whatever you need to do to keep that lethal means of suicide out of the hands of someone who may want to use it. And we're going to talk more about that later. In the community itself, schools, you have to be careful. There's a lot of talk about bullying. It's been going on for years, and young kids taking their life by suicide because they're bullied in school. What's happening in your schools? Is it safe? How is it safe? How can you make it more safe? But be aware of what's going on. How about continuum of care in the community when someone actually goes and gets help, say at a psychiatric facility, and comes home? What are they coming home to? It sort of gets back to that story I told you about the kids I used to work with. How are their relationships? Do they have friends? Strong family support? What are some of the social programs that you might be able to direct them to get the kind of support they need if they don't have those things? And how are they, when you're looking at someone and talking to someone, how are they in coping with problem solving? I mean, can they handle it on their own? Can you help them or teach them some skills? And I know a lot of you teach in what you do. How can you teach them to teach these things to people to give them a better shot out there in the community? And the bottom line, folks, that really all of this is consider yourself a person who's in a position, because you are, to give a person a reason for living. It's not easy to do, but if you work at it and you can give them a reason for living, less chance that they're going to want to take their life by suicide. So QPR also has a number of clues and warning signs. I'm going to go through some of those with you. Keep in mind, which is sort of obvious, but the more clues and signs observed, the greater the risk, right? So if you can eliminate some of those problems, that's good once you know what they are. But you take all signs seriously. Now, there's some direct verbal clues. You may have heard some of these, you may not have heard some of these. And some of these I have to distinguish by saying, content or context, not content, but context of these verbal clues are important. And I'll tell you what I mean when I say that. So you're with someone and they've flat out said to you, and you know them, I've decided to kill myself. Now, if you've had those pangs, if you will, or those feelings like this person hasn't been themselves, they haven't been around as much, you notice they're isolated more than they were before, and they say that to you, I've decided to kill myself. When did you decide that? Why are you going to do that? Have you thought about how you're going to do it? Push them on it. Don't just let it go flying by. Now, a comment like, I wish I were dead. Well, I hate to admit this, but there are times I think I probably said that. And there may have been times you said it, Oh no, I've got to get up at 4 a.m. and oh my God, I wish I were dead. But again, in the proper context, if this is the same person is depressed, seems to be hopeless, and they come out with these kinds of comments, that's what we're zeroing in on here. Someone flat out comes out and they say, I'm going to commit suicide. These are all big, gigantic open doors that you've got to stick your foot in. You've got to get in. So what are you talking about? When did you decide this? What are you going to do exactly? And when are you going to do it? Get that line of communication going. Another one is I'm going to end it all. Not I'm thinking of ending it all, not sometimes I'd like to end it all. I'm going to end it all. They're basically saying to you, that's it. They've had it done. And the last one and I sort of joke with this one a little bit, if such and such doesn't happen, I'll kill myself. Well, we don't mean someone who finds out that her boyfriend may not ask her to the prom. If Johnny doesn't ask me to the prom, I'm going to kill myself. Okay, well, that's one thing. Or if she doesn't say yes when I ask her to the prom, I'm going to kill myself. That's not what we're talking about here. But if someone flat out says, you know, if I lose this job, I'll have no income. I've got bills coming out my ears. I'm just going to kill myself. So you see how the context of it fits in. You have to work around what you're dealing with and what's going on in that person's life. Now, there's some indirect verbal clues, like I'm tired of life. I just can't go on. Well, you hear that more now, believe it or not. Like, I'm sick and tired of this pandemic. I'm sick and tired of the word COVID. You know, I just can't go on anymore. So someone just saying, well, it's getting to be too much, I can't go on, or they really mean they can't go on. A biggie, I think, that needs warrants attention is my family would be better off without me. And that's definitely what do you mean? Why? Why would they be better off without you? What's the problem? Get into it. Who cares if I'm dead anyway? Again, it's indirect, but pretty serious. I just want out. That can go either way, depending what the situation is. Well, I won't be around much longer. That one is a serious one, obviously. Well, why? You're going on a trip? I mean, what's the story? What do you mean? You're leaving the town? You're leaving the state? You're moving? You're getting a new job? No, I'm people don't need me around here. I'm all done. Well, pay attention to that. Then pretty soon you won't have me to worry about anymore. That's another very serious one. Because what else could that possibly mean? You know, you're not gonna have to worry about me anymore. You'll hear older people say that sometimes to their children. Well, you know, you won't have me around much longer, and you won't have to worry about me. Especially one of the biggest things with older people, and I see it with my own mom, who's 98 years old. I don't want to be a burden to my family, you know, so you won't have me around much longer. Some of the behavioral clues that we want to watch for, and this one is always sort of number one on the list, but if there's been any previous suicide attempts, that's a definite behavioral clue, because if they've done it before, they know how to do it, they've tried it, they thought about it, there's a possibility that raises the risk factor somewhat. Acquiring a gun or stockpiling pills, let's not talk about that for a second. Acquiring a gun, today gun sales are up like in the stratosphere. Everyone's buying a gun. So we're not talking about that. What we're talking about is someone who's been depressed, someone who's been down, someone who's having real bad times with their coworkers or their bosses. And on their lunch hour, they go out and they come back and you say, how was lunch? I skipped lunch. I had to buy this gun. Let me show it to you. That's something you should be aware of, not being like within the norm. Like, we could have bought it on the weekend. You know, you mean you skipped your lunch and went out and just to buy a gun? Something's happening there. The stockpiling of pills we have to be cautious about with older folks. I remember I told you earlier that like 1 in 4 elderly will complete an attempt at suicide. What'll happen is they will quietly stockpile those pills, which is also sometimes the method of choice, especially with women. And then all of a sudden just take them all, and they won't be a burden anymore. They're going to take that way out. So you have to try to keep an eye on that. If you're in the situation where you can keep an eye on that, and make sure that's not going on. Now, if you've got co-occurring depression, moodiness, and hopelessness, the alerts go like right through the ceiling, because that's a trio they can blow at any time. Putting personal affairs in order. Now, that's a good thing, right? Under normal conditions. But if all of a sudden your husband or your wife or your mom or just, well, I have to go to the attorney today, I've got to get my affairs in order. And that never came up, right? Never in a discussion. Well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Why are you going? No, I'm going. Matter of fact, and I'm going today. I'm not putting this off another day. that should alert you to the fact that there might be something going on, because that's something they could do next week or a month from now, right? Doesn't have to be done this afternoon. Giving away prized possessions, that's an important one also, because if you think about, like, I'll use myself as an example. I have a number of things they're memorabilia from my time in the service, and they're very, very important to me. And I happen to have a nephew who's been very involved with me on working with veterans and veterans activities. And I know that I want him to have those things, but I don't want him to have them now because they mean so much to me. But if tomorrow morning I start putting all these things in a box and call him up and say, "Hi, Ian, are you home now? You gonna be home for a while?" "Yeah." "Good, I want to give you all my stuff." Not good. Why not? So you want to look into that. This one is sort of interesting. A sudden interest or disinterest in religion. But what the heck does that mean? Well, if someone is considering taking their life by suicide and haven't been really sort of super religious or that much into their religion, they sort of might think it might be a time to check things out. And if they're going to be going into another place, if they believe in that, or didn't quite believe in it, but now they do, maybe they want to learn more about it. The other side is sort of, I don't think you'll be too surprised with that, disinterest in religion. And that's like, how could God do this to me? I can't believe he took my child. I can't believe, and all of a sudden disinterest. I don't want anything to do with the church anymore. And you combine that with things like the depression and the moodiness, and that's a behavioral clue that you want to watch out for. Always, always, always drugs, alcohol abuse. If someone was in rehab and they came out and they relapsed, those are high profile areas. As an aside, as far as drug abuse goes or drug overdoses go, it's believed in the industry, if you will, that many, many, many of the drug overdoses were actually a result of an attempted suicide. But what happens is when the police respond to those situations and they find someone that's OD'd, they write it up as an accident. They don't write it up as an attempted suicide because they probably have no justification to do so. But the more people who do this kind of work get into the research of what's going on, they start looking at that person's life and what led up to it, there's a very, very strong belief that a very high number, not a low number, but a high number of drug overdoses were actually suicide attempts. And when we talk about unexplained anger, aggression, and irritability, what I'm talking about there is, I'll give you sort of a quick example. Dad comes home from work, a long day at work, or mom comes home from work, a long day at work, and little Johnny had his snack in the afternoon. He's a latchkey kid. And of course, he left his dish on the table with all crumbs in it and a half a glass of milk and just a mess. And so dad says, or mom says, "Gee, Johnny, don't forget, after you have your snack, wash your dish. And, if you don't finish your drink, dump it and wash your glass. Don't leave it on the table." Versus someone walking in the door, seeing a half a glass of milk, a dirty dish on the table, taking the dish and the glass and throwing them through the plate glass window. A little bit of an overreaction, right? A lot of anger there, a lot of aggression, a lot of irritability. It just doesn't make sense. It's not natural for somebody to behave that way. So if you see that kind of behavior in someone, again, heightened awareness. There's some situational clues you can watch for. And we talked about this, I think, earlier, but being fired from a job. Oh my God, I can't believe I lost my job. I have to go home and tell my wife, or I have to go home and tell my husband. We just signed Johnny up for private school. We just bought the car because I was supposed to get that promotion. And it gets so overwhelming that someone could get to a point where they just say, it's easier for me just to take my life and just leave, get away from the situation. In the case of a student being expelled from school, again, a lot of the same feelings. Oh no, what do I tell my mom now? I did a QPR training for, I won't mention the school, but it was a private school. And they were 14-year-olds. And I was so taken aback by that group because these kids were so depressed I mean, they were clinging onto each other. They happened to all be girls, crying and had questions like, if I tried to help my friend, but they wouldn't listen to me, what do I do now? If you go to an adult, they don't want to listen to you because you're a kid. I mean, this is all just pouring out and pouring out. So after I just wanted to give them all a gigantic hug, and it was over and said, it's going to be okay, So I asked the woman who worked there, worked on the intake team, and I shared with her, I said, I'm really taken aback a little bit by the level of depression, that these kids, they're in a great school. They probably have great lives ahead of them. She said, well, let me see if I can help you with that. We had a child last week, brought the child into the program. The last thing her parents said to her was, we're spending a lot of money to send you here. At the end of this 4 years, if you're not accepted to an Ivy League school, don't come home. So you want to talk about pressure? That's pressure. Then I understood. Then I got it. A recent unwanted move. We talk about kids again here too a lot because I was just mentioning to some friends of mine this morning. They said, well, why would that be a problem? And I said, well, think about it. You're the adult, and you and your wife are the adult. You get a new job opportunity. You're going to move away. And let's say they're adolescents, right? Their entire existence is totally based on their peer group. It's all that matters. And now you're going to uproot and go to some distant state somewhere, and they have to start all over again. And they have to be accepted by probably one of the toughest groups to be accepted by, which are adolescents in a whole new setting. So, loss of any major relationship, obviously, whether it's a spouse, a child, a friend, especially if it was by suicide. That sort of just enhances the bad, terrible situation. Diagnosis of a serious illness, terminal illness, which you'll probably see again in older people. Anticipated loss of financial security. We talked about that a little bit, but one that we don't think about often, and this would be, you work all your life. You at some point decide, I've got a plan for my retirement, but you don't do that. You have everything in the bank or everything in some stocks that somebody told you are great, and on and on and on. And 3 months or 2 months before you're going to retire, 2008 happens again, where the markets are off 50, 60%. And all your retirement money, you're now at 50% of where you need it to be. And guess what? You don't have 10 years to get it back necessarily. You need that money in 3 months. You are counting on it. That's a heck of an impact. Again, a situational clue that you might want to watch out for those folks and see what kind of shape they're in, because they've just taken a tremendous hit. And in like most hits that are most devastating, they're the ones we never, ever anticipated. So it's like hitting a brick wall at 100 miles an hour. I mentioned this once also before when I talked about my mom, fear of becoming a burden to others. And that's a real big one for older folks, especially going back a few generations, because their total existence, their total job was to take care of you, not you to take care of them. So sometimes a decision is made to do what might be necessary, not to put their children or others in a position of them becoming a burden in their mind. Now, this is not a sexist statement. It's based on fact. If a man calls and says to you, I'm going to kill myself, take it extremely seriously. Now, why is that? Well, it has to do with what I mentioned to you a little earlier. Men of all ages are in high-risk groups. Boys, teenage boys, old white males. Over 71% are what we call lethal planners. they use a gun, over 71%. In most cases, they know how to use it, they plan it carefully, and they are not interested in being rescued. It doesn't fit. Now, I've changed this a little bit to mention more women are buying guns. Look at the military as far as knowing how to use the weapons. Well, more women are in the military now than ever before, right? So you can probably take some of those and just put them right across the board for men and women. And the last thing related to that is if a woman calls about a man, calls about her husband, her father, her whatever, take her even more seriously. Why? Because usually in that relationship, the woman will go overboard and probably has gone overboard in her lifetime to protect that man, to protect his ego, to protect his manliness, if you will, in that relationship, because she understands what it meant to him. If she's calling and saying, I can't stop him, I have no control over this situation, that's serious. So now we get into some tips for asking the suicide question. Now, again, this is not an easy thing to do, and I get it, okay? I understand it. But I'll share with you that if you can get yourself to that point, it really works. I just did this 4 nights ago. Wasn't the first time. I have a friend who has a daughter who has a friend. My friend's daughter was getting ready to leave on vacation yesterday. Her friend was really leaning heavy on her because she said she was going to kill herself. She was tired of living, had a very bad home situation, et cetera, et cetera. So my friend's dad says to me, why don't you call Bob and just have a chat? And we did. And we went back and forth about 3 days. And I asked a lot of questions. The girl wouldn't talk to me. I wanted to get her on the phone, but she wouldn't do that. So I told this person the kinds of questions to ask, and she'd feed that back to me, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, we got to a point where she felt she was doing better. I said, terrific. 11:30 at night, and it was just conking off, and my phone goes off. And it was my friend's daughter, and she said, she's really bad. I don't know what to do. And I said to her, you are now down to 2 choices. Choice number 1, if you're absolutely certain, you have no doubt that she's going to do something, hang up this phone and dial 911. Get the police out there, get her taken to where she can get some help. Your only other alternative, if she'll agree, is to dial 211. Now, 211, which is one of the numbers I had written down here to share with you, you're probably familiar with it, but they have crisis intervention teams. And once they get that information, they will respond. And they'll either send someone out if they can't deal with it on the phone. If they can't deal with it on the phone, they'll send a team out. They'll do an evaluation on site. And they'll make a call. Is this person all right? Or should this person be hospitalized? So anyway, about 12:30, I got a call back. And she said that the team contacted them. They were going out, they went out, they did an evaluation, they hooked her up with a counselor. And the girl felt very relieved that she could just pick up the phone 24/7 and talk to someone. So we averted that crisis. But you can't, once you make the commitment, and I'll talk about this a little bit after, you got to stick with that commitment. You can't let it go, or you can't say, hey, look, I got to get some sleep. Give me a call tomorrow morning. It doesn't work that way. So it's not easy. What I'm about to share with you is not an easy thing to do. So if you're in doubt, as I had mentioned to her, don't wait. Ask that question. Are you thinking of killing yourself? Get it out there. If the person is reluctant, be persistent. That's the P, and Q. Persuade and persistency. Stick with it. Don't say, oh, okay, because I thought you were going to kill yourself. Let's go have coffee. No, stay with it if you feel that strongly. Make sure you're talking to this person, by the way. I almost hate saying this, but I have to say it because it's in the the list of things I have to say. Do it in a private area. Don't do it amongst 12 people having pizza. No, by the way, you really going to kill yourself? No, get them off to a quiet place and respect their dignity and give them the time they need. You have to allow them to talk freely. Do not judge. Not your job. Don't judge. If you want to be a judge, then don't get involved with this. Give yourself plenty of time. Like I said before, well, don't call me back tonight. I'm sort of tired. No. Don't look at your watch and say, I really care about you and I really need to know what's going on, but I need to pick up my kids in hockey practice in 5 minutes. You can't do that. And have your resources handy. We're going to talk about that a little later, but remember I told you about getting to know your community and what's going on in your community and what the resources are in your community? Because when you get to the point where you've got to say, okay, here's what we're going to do, you got to be able to say what you're going to do. Have your phone numbers, your hotline phone numbers, the name of the therapist of the person, get to know them well. Are they involved with their church at all? Do they respect a clergy member they'd like to talk to? Do they have a favorite brother or sister? Do your homework and know where to go. Because remember, how you ask the question is much less important than not asking it. You got to ask the question. Don't not ask it because you're not sure quite how to say it. Say something, get it out there.
Bob, we have about 10 more minutes remaining in the session.
Okay, great. Okay, so anyway, let me just skip through a couple of things here. The one question you never ask is this. You're not suicidal, are you? Because that opens the door for, what? Are you crazy? Why would you say something like that? Never say an open-ended question like that. You're not suicidal, are you? Let me jump to persuasion real quick. You've got to listen to the problem. You got to remember that suicide is not the problem. Remember that suicide is not the problem. It's only the solution to a perceived insoluble problem. That's an important one. If you get a chance, jot it down. I'll say it again slowly. Remember, suicide is not the problem. Only the solution to a perceived insoluble problem. Keyword out of the being perceived. Don't ever rush to judgment and offer hope in any form. In the end, then say, can I take you for help? Will you let me take you for help? That's your first shot. If they say no to that, then say, okay, will you let me help you get help? And that's where you get involved with guy either with making the telephone call or having them make a phone call to 211. Because your willingness to listen and to help can rekindle hope for these folks. And it can make all the difference in the world. The last thing I'm going to leave you with, and it's pretty serious, is that if you're into a situation where there's definite suicidal ideation, alcohol or substance abuse involved, or a firearm involved, all gloves are off, end the conversation, dial 911. If it's not safe to dial 911 there, leave the house. Dial 911 on your cell phone as you're going out the door, get them help. This is not a time to negotiate. And these things you see sometimes where, oh yeah, I can talk them out of it or whatever, no. The only problem that's going to happen there is when the police come, they're going to have two possible victims instead of one. Okay, so I'll stop it at that so I can answer some questions if people have questions. Also, I'd like to mention that if we don't get to your questions and you want to submit them to Marcia, I'll be happy to respond to those at another time. Thanks, Marcia.
Thank you, Bob. Could you just possibly, just for me to re-clarify, state those three questions? It's, are you considering suicide? Can I help you or can I refer you to help? Well, how did you phrase those?
Right. If you know the person or you feel the person is serious about it, you would first want to get them help, and you want to be the person to bring them to that help. So let's say, oh yeah, I want to talk to my therapist. Make the phone call and say, can we come and see you? And drive them to the therapist. Drive them to the emergency room. Go with them. You know, one of the questions this girl had the other night is, well, my friend doesn't have insurance. Doesn't matter. You go into any emergency room, and you guys know this better than I do. You go into an emergency room and you say, I have someone here who wants to take her life by suicide. Someone's going to see her. They're not going to say, well, you don't have insurance. When you get insurance, come back. I mean, for obvious reasons, right? Because if they did, and then the hospital's not in good shape after that, right? The second thing is if you can't get them in the car and get them to go with you, okay, can I call? Let me call somebody with you. Let's get somebody else involved. So those are basically it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else would like to unmute and ask questions to Bob or type something in the chat? Please do.
Hi,
Erica.
this is Erica Mum. So Bob, thank you so much. This was a super engaging and informative and passionate program, and I'm very, very grateful to you. And I appreciate you bringing up the 211 piece. And I wanted to know a little bit more because I have been in a situation where the response was you can call 211, and I feel like sometimes that's a hard thing, like that's a hard next thing for someone to do. So I appreciate, I guess the answer, which I'm thinking about, is what you said, is that someone has to do it for the person, right? Was that that was the scenario that was playing out there? Because I feel like, you know, sometimes you get this with, or in my experience, I got it both with the school and actually a pediatrician's office that was like, if you continue to be concerned, you can call 211. Well, I don't really want to call 211. I want someone to help me do that, you know?
Right.
So, that was interesting. So thank you.
Yeah, it almost gets to a point, like everything else that's hard in this world, and this is hard. This is not easy, where, yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable. You might just have to live with the fact that, yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable. And you have to make the decision, do I want to take that step? Do I want to take the next step, knowing that it's going to be uncomfortable? But let's keep in mind that what we're talking about here is possibly saving a person's life. So sometimes we have to be a little uncomfortable when we do that. But if that person lives, I don't think you'll feel too uncomfortable after that.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome, Erica.
Bob, this is Marcia. I have two questions. One comes from Nancy, and Nancy had asked, what if you really don't know the person or patient you're supporting them on the phone?
What if you don't know the person, but you're supporting them on the phone?
Correct.
I want to answer the question with a question, like, how would that transpire? How would the person be? I mean, when I worked the suicide prevention lines, or she's thinking of that, the hotline, I didn't know the people calling in. We would concentrate on the events, what they were talking about, evaluate things like, well, have you attempted to take your life before? You have? Okay, how did you do that? Or if they haven't, well, if you're thinking about taking your life by suicide, what have you thought about? What do you think you would do? Do you have a plan? Do you have a plan? So you have to sort of, if you don't know them, you sort of have to do a little more detective work and draw out from them what they're dealing with for you to be able to respond. If that answers the question, I hope it does.
Nancy,
Yeah.
does that clarify?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
And then we had one from Melissa, and she said, could you possibly review how you would follow up on a post-attempt or post-treatment of a teen child?
Sure. If you know the child, here you got to get a little careful, because if it's handled by an agency, HIPAA laws and everything else, and I'm not an attorney, you probably can't get information, you know. But if you know the person involved, we always recommend, if you're comfortable doing it, do a follow-up call yourself, you know, in a couple of weeks. How are things going? How, you know, would you like to get together for coffee? If you know the person personally, I think what you might be talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, that you got involved with someone and you referred them to a source, mental health facility or whatever, wanting to find out, gee, I wonder how that person did, or wonder how the person made out. They probably won't tell you, sadly, if that's the question.
Melissa, you want clarifying? It says the child had service in place, but as parent, how do I How do I help?
Oh, wait a minute. Read the first part of that. The parent what?
We may want to take this offline as a follow-up.
Okay, all right. Because if it is your own child or someone's child, there are ways to do that. So
Perfect. Thank you for
it'd
sharing.
be a separate issue.
Perfect. We're almost rounding at the 1 o'clock hour. Kathy Murphy, any feedback or insights or any other questions?
Oh, had to unmute. No, but thank you very much, Bob. This was really helpful and interesting as we look at, our families and our community and our students for, how we can help them through so many of the, I don't want to say tragedies, but the struggles that they're having.
Mhm. Good.
I think
I'll
Erica.
say
had one
that
more.
RGH, once we're up and going again, when COVID ends, if there are any of you who feel that you have a group that you would want to hear, have us do a full 2-hour talk to your group, we don't charge for that. There's not a charge for it. The only thing we're limited by is the number we can do in the course of a year. But if you wanted to let Marcia know, we've done teachers, firefighters, first responders, school administrators. It all started with veterans, actually. That's how we first got our grant. And then from that, it's just grown. I mean, we were involved not too long ago with a couple of years ago when that airplane crashed at Bradley, the military airplane, working with the firefighters from Granby and East Granby, the surrounding towns. And of course, students, it can really be used anywhere. And we want to get the word out as much as possible because the more gatekeepers we can create, hopefully the more lives we can save.
And Bob, we have just one more question. It says, how does cutting relate to suicide? People who are cutting.
Yeah, I really can't respond to that directly because I'm not a doctor or a psychiatrist, except that as far as a direct relationship, I wouldn't know. But if someone is going through that, if they have that frame of mind, there's obviously a lot of unhappiness about their self-esteem. And that would jump into the category of depression, low self-esteem, which are all categories that would fall into maybe possibly making the person more suicidal than one who does not do that.
Thank you for the reflection, Bob. Sorry to cut you off, Kath. I just wanted to make sure that we got on that before I bring it to a close.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I know a couple of years ago, Bob, you did a program for CLN for faculty during student day, and some of the faculty from my school went and found it very, very helpful. So if people are interested, I would strongly encourage them to seek you out.
Sure, absolutely. Be happy to help whenever we can.
Thank you. Well, I just want to thank Bob Havens. You did a wonderful overview. And I think, pulling out the pearls and peeling back the onion, as you said, is so critical. As just for our attendees, thank you very much. Peg Malik will be following up with your certificate of attendance and maybe some of those key questions that Bob had shared in an email, just so they can be top of mind. As you know, this was the first in a series of 2 related to our mental health and strategies for resilience. The second session is going to be held on March 29th. It's a Tuesday. Again, another lunch and learn from 12 to 1. And that's going to be on the 4 pillars of creating and sustaining a mentally healthy workplace culture. And that's going to be conducted by Kim LaMontagne, and it's also going to be free of charge. And Peg Malik will be sending out the registrations to not only everybody who attended today, but also to our larger group. We are going to be actually providing the CE for that. So we'll have a nursing CE unit for that program. So looking forward to continuing our dialogue. And Bob, I think you kicked us off in a perfect way. Any last pearl before we close today's session?
No, except I want you guys to know how much I appreciate what you do. And I'm saddened sometimes when I see how you guys are treated. Heroes 1 minute and enemies the next minute, and I don't like it personally. But if it's worth anything to you, I'll always be out there fighting for what you're all about. who you are and how so very important you are to all of us, and I thank you.
Thank you, Bob, and that's a wonderful close. Everyone have a wonderful and safe day. Feel free to continue to reach out, as this is going to be a constant topic that we're going to be addressing for the next 2 to 3 months. So again, thank you for your time and have a wonderful afternoon. And Bob, terrific job.
Okay,
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye
Bob.
now. Bye.
Bob, thank you again. I'm going to have Peggy stop the recording. Sorry, we started a little late after your introduction, but I think you did some
That's okay.
catching up.